Committee. Representative Smith, would you lead us in a word of prayer? And then we'll have Representative Angelos please lead us in the pledge.
Well, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity to just get together. Lord, I just pray that as we go through and work these bills, Lord, I just pray for clear understanding and wisdom from you. Lord, we just ask for those suffering the different tragedies across the entire state, Lord. We just ask that your peace would be all those that are mourning at this time. We just ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. We are going to start with Senate File 152. Senator Barlow, welcome to House Appropriations. Please present the bill. I'm sorry? Oh, yes.
Representative Alleman.
Excused.
Representative Angelos. Here. Representative Haroldson.
Here.
Representative Pendergraft.
Here.
Representative Sherwood. Here. Representative Smith.
Here.
Chairman Bear.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
All right. Sorry about that, Senator Barlow. Please proceed now that we've got our roll call done.
Nope. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be with you here this morning. Mr. Chairman, before you have Senate File 152, Wildfire Management Task Force and State Forester. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to walk quickly through the bill, and then, of course, there are the experts here at the table and others in the room that will provide details and answer questions that are of interest to you. Mr. Chairman, the bill is basically three different things. It's amending the duties of the state forester. As Chairman Bear, Representative Angelos will recall, this past summer in our community we had significant wildfires, as there were in Representative Pendergraft's community and even Representative Smith's community. All of us had fires, basically. Let's be honest about this. Part of that, what we learned, and there was a particular meeting that I think Chairman Bear and Representative Angelos, well, we got together and said, what are the problems? What are the shortfalls? What are the challenges we have? The state forester was there, federal agencies, et cetera, and there were some gaps identified in that meeting. Subsequent to that, more conversations, et cetera. So that's actually the genesis of this bill, was that meeting, the experiences we had this summer, that particular meeting, and then the subsequent conversations. So what this bill does, Mr. Chairman, I'll just go through the title. It amends the duties of the state forester. The state forester, of course, is housed within the Office of State Lands Investment. They work at the behest of the Board of Land Commissioners, but they have I would argue without this bill, they have some nebulous duties and authorities. So what the bill, first thing this bill does is try to clarify what some of those duties and authorities are. The second thing this bill does is establish a task force. I believed, and in talking with the fire service folks, and this bill was a collaborative effort, that there are more things that the state of Wyoming needs to consider, but it was more than we wanted to take on with an initial bill. And so that is the purpose of the task force. And certainly I'll let others speak to the task force. In this collaborative process, they said, how can we get more done? And I said, well, maybe a task force. And so that's what that was for. And then the final thing, Mr. Chairman, is, as you know, the governor had a budget request, supplemental budget, and there were appropriations in that to refill borrowing authority, repay some of those things. So that's the final part of the bill. The bill before you was engrossed. It was modified twice in the House, and I'll point those things out, or excuse me, in the Senate. I'll point those things out as we go through. With that, Mr. Chairman, if you have any initial questions, or you want me to just walk through the bill?
I do have one. As you go through the bill further, the appropriations to fill the accounts that were depleted, I believe we have agreement on both sides of the the supplemental budget to accomplish those things so that once we get a budget passed, I'm highly confident that we will, those things would be duplicative. Do we have that the budget controls in this bill or some other language that deals with that issue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman, that was amended in second reading in the Senate. It's the new section 5 in the bill, and it basically says anything that the budget has control, and anything the budget does is reduced 1-for-1 out of this bill.
Very good.
And I will, Mr. Chairman, there is one difference in the bill, this bill, than the budget has, and I will get to that when we get there.
Thank you.
But there is a reduction, that's section 5 of the bill.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, we'll just go page 2 into 3 of the bill. Page 2, Mr. Chairman, obviously is quite a bit of existing language. This is where you actually find the authority, the appointment, and then the duties of the state forester. And what you'll find, and it's not in the bill because we're not amending that component, is much of the state duties of the state forester have to do with forestry, right? The timber harvest, et cetera, et cetera. And there is actually very little, if anything, said about actually the wildland fire issues. So this is why you'll have all this new language. So I'll just go through the bill. There's on page 2, lines 14, 15. This is kind of some odd language that the state forester who's housed under one agency has to go to the Board of Land Commissioner to hire employees to take care of his things. So we just took that language out of the Board of Land Commissioners purview, if you will, Mr. Chairman, and put it directly under the state forester, and you'll see it on the next page. And then this is where you get into the duties, the forester shall, and this is the political subdivisions of the state, including, obviously, the current statute just says the federal government. We think it's pretty obvious that our local subdivisions should be number 1. The next page, Mr. Chairman, rules. Actually, the state forester has no rule-making authority at this point in statute. Now, they do it through the State Board of Land Commissioners, so they have a capacity, but there's just kind of this odd spot. Then, which you will, Mr. Chairman, lines 4 and 5, this is that language that was stricken on page 2, brought over to page 3. And then, Mr. Chairman, lines 7 and 8 is actually a reference that's taken directly from the state fire marshal. And what that statute says is the state fire marshal has duties for fires, investigation, et cetera, except for wildland and forestry fire control programs. And that is designated the state forester. So we just took that exact language and brought it over to the state forester statutes so that we could be clear. It's kind of odd to have your duties obligated to you in someone else's statute. So we just brought it to this statute, and that is verbatim. And then we added the but not limited to, and then this was the collaborative effort with the fire services, with the state forester, about what things should we put in here that we understand. So the first one would be dealing with lands owned by the state. Some we recall we've had discussions about military lands and who deals with fire on military lands. But there are, of course, state lands, game and fish land, parks, service lands, military lands, et cetera. So this would give us a central point in the state forester's office. The next one is fire management assistance. Certainly our local jurisdictions are the first line in all fires in the state of Wyoming, but they have limited resources and they have other responsibilities, so there has to be assistance to kind of help take over, transition, et cetera, to other responsible authorities. Makes sense through the state fire service, state fire office. Mr. Chairman, page 3, continued preposition resources. High fire danger, you get things where you need them, where you think you anticipate you may need them. Seems pretty obvious, but no explicit authority to do that. And then, of course, training programs is something we heard. Our community certainly about, we got to just work better to get our volunteers and our full-time forces trained up, stood up stronger, and the state forester could maybe assist with that. And then the final one, Mr. Chairman, I'll go on to page 4 and then I'll stop if there's any questions on those duties. The final one, Mr. Chairman, is an interesting one that actually, and on full disclosure, these private fire land resources, in full disclosure, one of the members of my family owns one of these companies. And so I've been hearing about this issue for quite some time, is when they go into an area and they are hired by insurance companies to protect private homes or businesses or whatever it is, there's no real mechanism for them to connect with the incident command, with the folks that are actually running the fires. And so what this would allow is the state forester to establish standards, et cetera, to say, all right, if you're going to be in our fires, on our fires, doing your jobs, which we want them to be there, we're going to have some standards, training standards, operational standards, communications. How do we actually, you'll hear maybe some stories about, in fires in the western side of the state, they want an evacuation, they want everybody out. Well, they don't have a way to communicate with these folks that are in there. They don't have a standardized protocol. So this would allow that standardized protocol. This is welcome both on the private side, and I believe you'll hear on the fire service side. So that's what that's about, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to stop for section 1 and answer any questions if you'd like.
Thank you. Any questions for the bringer at this point? Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for being here. The standardized protocol caught my ear because in the past, we were working with several different agencies to put some things together, and that ended up including standardized equipment, communication equipment. Is that part of the parameters that's in mind here?
Senator Barlow.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear, Representative Pendergraft, are you talking about the language on page 4 or somewhere else? I'm sorry. I just want to be clear, I'm looking at the correct spot, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I was talking about your statement, the standard protocol.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess because with this bill passes, there'll be rulemaking authority. I think you get all of the above. If it's, I don't know about equipment per se, but certainly communication, access to the IC, incident commands, and things like that. So I think what we want is, well, let's go back to, I don't want to go too far back, but let's go back to WyoLink. We have communications in the state of Wyoming. Could this say part of this, if you're going to be a part of our system, do you have to have some compatibility with that? Potentially. I'm not saying that's what they would do through rulemaking, but that may be one of those things, to your point about communications or standardization.
Further questions for the bringer? Seeing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So section 2, this is the task force. This was modified by an amendment, excuse me, in the Senate Standing Committee. But basically this was at the suggestion of the collaborators, i.e. state fire marshals, state, the Chiefs Association, excuse me, Mr. Chairman. A couple members of the House, a couple members of the Senate, and then you go on to page 5, Mr. Chairman, and a governor's office designee, the Fire Board Association, you can read through it. State Insurance Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, this might sound a little odd, but actually folks are having challenges getting wildland fire coverage in the state of Wyoming. That's part of the reason that I asked for the language on in the previous section about those private resources. But there we are having challenges, and some companies are not covering because of the risk. And so having the state insurance commissioner, I think, is important. And then some other folks, local government, obviously, whether it's maybe a fire district or a county individual, et cetera, having someone at the table, having that representing them, ag industry. And then, Mr. Chairman, page 6, line 5, in the original bill, this was someone with broad fire expertise, and the standing committee adjusted this to a member from the forest product industry. So you could call that as, how do we have logging? How do we have prevention in a broader scale, if you will, to help, at least in the forest areas, we can maybe prevent fires. Particularly, that's our goal would be on state lands, of course. So that's the task force, and then the duties are, figure out what's possible, what needs to be done, make a report. The report date was actually a little earlier because we wanted to give time for the governor to, and the legislature to receive that report before we went into maybe the hot and heavy of the budget. So if there were budgetary issues, some folks decided we need a little more time, so the date was pushed to November 15th, which is still in front of when the governor recommends his budget to the legislature, and you would have time to take up the report. Staffing, Mr. Chairman, staffing is LSO. There's some talking about the per diem, et cetera. Page 8 goes into some appropriations, $25,000 for the legislative members, $25,000 for non-legislative members who are not otherwise state employees. And I'd be glad to stop for any questions on that. Ms. Nor, like I said, other folks will speak more specifically to their interest in that, but I'd be glad to take any questions on that section.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. I'm hearing the list of people on the board, like what I'm hearing. But did I hear that somebody who's actually an expert in fires was removed? And then I went back very quickly and looked at the list, and I don't see anybody on that board that has that background. Is that incorporated into one of these other people perhaps, or? And then the second question is, for example, in my country, you have state land, you got private land, you've got National Forest Service all together. Has it been considered to have some sort of a liaison with the National Forest Service in there?
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question. So to the first part of the question, fire expertise. Page 5, lines 9 and 10, President of the Fire Advisory Board or their designee. So that would include all the chiefs and fire wardens of the state of Wyoming. So I think you're getting that there. The state forester obviously has those expertise and experience as well. And then the governor has some latitude in who they appoint as well. At the bottom of page 5, local government could be somebody that has fire expertise. Ag industry, this goes to the second question you talked about. Ag industry, what other private lands? Ag industry would be there. Forest products, that might be actually a forester or a company that does timbering in that forest above your community. As far as the liaison with the federal agency, which was in the second part of the question, Mr. Chairman, we didn't include them as members because this is Wyoming-centric, if you will. But that doesn't mean that you can't liaison and take testimony, et cetera. So certainly if the committee wants something more formal with this, I'm sure I'll let the state forester speak to that. But I think you would recognize, and I think you'll hear the testimony, they work with them every day. Now that relationship, I think you'll hear this, that relationship is changing right now significantly because of some of the changes that are happening at the federal level. So we may have to become more reliant on ourselves, just to be honest, in the short term, based on some of the things that I'm understanding are happening. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question.
Okay. Representative Hurlston had a question, but he's departed, so we'll move on. Any further questions at this point? Okay.
I'm sure I would have said yes.
Actually, I think he's just getting the doors for us to keep the noise down. Well, maybe not. All right. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, excuse me, I'll go to section 3 of the bill. Mr. Chairman, this goes to the appropriations that you inquired about earlier. These are identical to what the governor requested in his budget, with one exception. So you'll see on page 9, the special contingency, and these funds were all consumed and used in this past fire season. I know you know all that. I won't say, but Homeland Security, going to the next page, the EFSA, Emergency Fire Suppression Account, then of course the money that was borrowed from the LSRA for repayment, and then you get into the retaining the funds, whether they're reappropriated or not. And then, Mr. Chairman, top of page 11, this is the second change that was made in the Senate Standing Committee amendment. And this is an adjustment from the original request from the governor's office. The governor's request was $30 million, And in the standing committee, they increased it by $10 million to $40 million. Now, to be clear, Mr. Chairman, this is borrowing authority. This is not cash going into an account or et cetera. This is just a borrowing authority. Mr. Chairman?
Sorry
go ahead.
to interrupt you, but I see here that they have a sunset on this borrowing authority. Can you just share with us the discussion in the Senate in that regard?
Mr. Chairman, I think this is just to get us to the rest of the biennium, because as you know, we consumed all of our borrowing authority, et cetera, in the first, few days of this current biennium. This is going to get us to hopefully to the end of the biennium. So this would only get us to the biennium. I would assume that the supplemental budget it's the same way in the supplemental budget. It only goes to the end of July 30th, 2026. So I think this is trying to mirror what the request was in the supplemental budget. You folks, of course, will take up the budget, and for the subsequent biennium starting next fall and then into next year with the budget session. So I think hopefully that explains where we are in that.
I can completely understand where constraints we would have in the supplemental budget. Just curious, this being a bill, if there was discussion as to allowing this borrowing authority to go beyond that period.
Mr. Chairman, I don't recall anything. I think we were just trying to mirror as close to, except we added money, they added money.
Right.
I think we're just trying to mirror the budget.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harrelson, did you have a question on the previous section?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Senator, thank you for bringing the bill. I was able to look at this prior to session starting, really excited about this conversation moving forward and maybe fixing some of these issues. So I'm looking at 11 members on the task force. Is that, am I counting that up right? And if so, is that, I think there's that fine line of too much, and we don't want to create a monster, and at the same time too little, maybe we don't get the expertise. Could you kind of speak a little bit? I know we've talked a little bit on that already, with possibly another person coming on representing the federal side, but I just am looking at an 11-member board, and are we going to be able to accomplish what we're looking at accomplishing, or do you think we're going to put mud in the water?
Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the question. I think that, well, first of all, the Senate Standing Committee wanted to add more legislators. That was rejected by the body. So they wanted to grow it, and we said no. There was the one adjustment between the fire expertise and the forest products. I think that's not a person, that's not a body, that's just a qualification, if you will. Mr. Chairman, I think it's fair to say, is there too many or too few? But what we're trying to do is get us folks to the table and give them a official seat at the table. You may hear today that there are folks in the electrical community, i.e. that would like to be there too. We have challenges with electrical lines and REAs, et cetera, and they say, hey, we'd like to have somebody on there that. You may hear that, and it'd be up for your consideration. We did not obviously put it in the initial bill. So you can grow this, you can shrink this. I think the bottom line is, I think you'll hear from others, is we need to have this continuing conversation, and this is a vehicle to do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up? Okay. All right, back to the following section.
Yep, thank you,
So
Mr.
please
Chairman.
proceed.
Mr. Chairman, so this is section 5, page 11 into page 12, 13. This is basically, to your point, your initial question, Mr. Chairman, was the budget. If it takes care of all this, what happens? Everything is reduced dollar for dollar. So if the budget goes through, everything goes away, with the exception, Mr. Chairman, as I pointed out, of that borrowing authority. This bill has $10 million more of borrowing authority. If you wanted to true it up to what the current proposed budget is, you would take $10 million out of that previous section. Mr. Chairman, and I've forgotten, I didn't bring my repealer with me. So maybe one of my colleagues has that as session law repealer. I apologize, section 6. And then, of course, effective immediately, because if you will recall, we were having wildfires in Laramie County in February of last year. So having our funds refunded, state forester up and going with the duties, it would be effective immediately. So, Mr. Chairman, be glad to stand for questions. but glad to also turn it over to the experts. Thank you.
Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, and for all those who are here to speak on this bill. I think this is an exciting concept. I just want to make sure that I'm clear, and then for the sake of the public, we're talking about an appropriation for the task force. That is not mirrored in the budget. Is that correct?
Senator Barlow.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, the Section 2, excuse me, the task force, there is no accommodation for that in the supplemental budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to ask you a question along the same lines. We have Senate File 148 that passed the Senate as well. Basically mirrors this with the exception of that task force. So you're a co-sponsor on that bill as well. Can you just give us your thoughts on this other option that's out there, and as the prime sponsor of this bill, how you see this being, the importance of this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think that bill actually, doesn't have any adjustments to the state forestry duties, doesn't have anything to do with the wildland task force. It is strictly a funding bill that does many of the things this does. The one thing additional it does is it goes into some of the rehabilitation things. And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I should have been better prepared to speak to that bill, but it has money actually in for invasive species, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this bill does not. This is strictly to the fire service issue. The restoration, rehabilitation, that bill has monies for that. This one doesn't. Yeah, anyway, that's the main differences I see between the two. And I support both. This one is, I think, the highest priority as far as in that realm.
Seeing no further questions, I think we'll go on
Thank you,
to the
Rick.
State Forester. Ms. Norris, thank you
Thank
for
you,
being here.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Good morning, Chairman Bear, members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Kelly Norris, and I'm the Wyoming State Forester. With me today is Assistant State Forester Fire Management Officer Jared DeLay, and we also have Assistant Assistant Fire Management Officer Chris Fallbeck. Chris does our aviation on our fire training program. He does quite a bit with Helitack in the seats. And then Jared here, you've seen probably multiple times on fires this summer. So just in case you throw a swing ball fire question at me, we have him here. So as the good senator said, Senate File 153 has 3 parts. We have the state forester's duties. The second part is the creation of the Wildfire Management Task Force, and the third pretty much matches the majority of the governor's supplemental budget request in regards to the wildfire suppression costs in 2024, which is refilling the EFSA and allowing for more authority for fire borrowing. The state forester's duties can be found in 3 different locations in Chapter 36. Duties of the state forester associated with the Emergency Fire Suppression Account, the Wyoming State Forestry Good Neighbor Authority revolving account, and the appointment of the state forester. Almost all of the proposed duties in Senate File 152 are duties the state forester is already being expected to do, and this bill is meant to confirm these duties with the rest of those duties already listed. And if you'd like, I'd be happy to walk you through how the state forester is already fulfilling these duties.
Please do.
Okay. So I provided each of you a handout with the current statute. As Senator Barlow said, this bill does not have the full appointment, but as you will notice, it says the first duty listed under the state forester is I, shall take action as may be deemed necessary by the State Board of Land Commissioners to protect forest, range, and other rural resources from fire. This responsibility shall in no way diminish the responsibility or authority of local fire protection districts. This duty has been basically what the state forester has utilized for wildfire management for decades. So going down and starting on our bill, on page 2, if you look at Senate File 152, line 20, that addition, as Senator Barlow said, all political subdivisions of the state. This better clarifies that the state forester cooperates with more than federal agencies, right? We cooperate with counties, conservation districts, fire districts. So this is just a clarification in that addition. If you move on to the top of page 3, line 1, the adopting of rules as necessary to fulfill the duties and described in this article. This is something that the state forester already has done in coordination with the Rural Fire Association. One significant example of that is we established statewide procedures for obtaining and completing task books and receiving a red card in Wyoming. And again, we did that in coordination with the Wyoming Rural Fire Association. The next duty, the appointment of assistants and employees as are necessary in executing the duties of the division. This is something the state forester already does. This language was originally located in the appointment section of the state forester, and this bill has moved the language to be under the state forester's duties, as it is a duty rather than a qualification. With that, if you move on to line 7, the maintain wildland and forestry fire control programs, including but not limited to. As the good senator said, this language matches what the fire marshal statute says, and I believe that's chapter 35, and just matches it up and puts it also in the state forester's duties. And what you see here then below that is the list of duties that the state forester is to implement to maintain wildland and forestry fire control programs. So fire management, coordination, and reimbursement for all lands owned and managed by the state of Wyoming and its agencies. So currently, the state forester is implementing this, for example, with Wyoming military, including reimbursing fire suppression costs through state forestry for costs on Wyoming military lands. We also provide suppression support and coordination on Wyoming state park lands. I believe our aviation, the last day of our contract, we were on Glendale State Park. And Wyoming game and fish lands. If you look at elk fire, there was a lot of lands of Wyoming game and fish lands that we helped coordinate on. So moving on to the next 3 duties, B, C, and D, these are duties the state forester is also already doing with our resources. We provide fire management assistance within Wyoming with our staff and the resources statewide. We sign agreements based on our assistance with our federal and county agencies. State forestry also pre-positions our resources based on fire risk or at the request of a county or fire district. So for example, we've hosted the smoke buster crew in Johnson County to get closer to areas that need immediate response. We've hosted our aviation at I think Sheridan, Gillette, Lusk, I think we were even in Douglas, at all the airports. We will move around our aviation assets just based on where the need is. And so that is something that we do very frequently. And we've also, when we can host an engine and get staff onto an engine, we will move an engine to high-risk areas. We've been requested through like Rock Springs to be there over the 4th of July. So these are things we already are doing. And then for duty D, state forestry staff, we've been providing training to local fire jurisdictions for decades, as well as to other state and federal agencies across Wyoming. Duty D, found on page 4, is the last duty listed. And this was a bit of a challenge this year that the bringer of the bill, the good senator, wanted to see listed in the state forester duties. Many insurance agencies have started to contract private firefighting resources to protect insured homes or assets during a wildland fire. This duty is something the state forester will coordinate with our Rural Fire Association to create and implement a standard process as how to handle these private contractors on wildland fires. It is a safety concern and it should be addressed. And so we're good with that duty. And again, these duties, these are already very similar duties that are being expected of the state forester to implement, and they do not require any additional funding or staffing. And so at this time, I will stop there to see if there's any questions for this section.
Any questions for the forester at this point? Seeing none, please proceed.
Okay. The second portion of Senate File 152 has to do with the creation of the Wildfire Management Task Force. I provided the committee a second handout for background information related to this section. Wildfire suppression in Wyoming is complicated. There is not a state that manages wildland fire like Wyoming does. Each county in Wyoming manages wildfire differently, and collectively there's approximately 70 different fire districts that manage wildfire across Wyoming. The 2024 wildfire season really exposed and highlighted gaps in our ability to respond to wildfire statewide. The manner in which we fill those gaps in our fire response is a question that requires input from all of our stakeholders. A lot has changed in wildland fire management over the last 15 years and is rapidly changing even in the last several weeks in federal land management. the amount of fires, the length of fire seasons, we've turned them into fire years, the additional homes and infrastructure that are needing to be protected, the type and number of resources we utilize for fire suppression, like aviation and hand crews, and the cost of those resources have significantly increased. Noticeably, there's a continued loss of fire experience, especially Wyoming wildfire experience in state forestry, some in the counties, and that has really greatly impacted our wildfire suppression efforts. So State Forestry conducted a survey last November, collected input from all 23 counties, and their feedback indicated significant challenges in Wyoming's wildfire suppression response, capacity, and funding needs. All three of these are closely linked together. These challenges can't just be solved by the state forester alone. How Wyoming manages wildfire should be really reviewed holistically, because a change in one area, such as the loss of federal resources, will impact state forestry and the local fire districts. State forestry recognizes wildfire suppression management is complicated, and we are committed to figuring out solutions that meet Wyoming's needs. This task force has become even more important than before, as federal agencies have been recently had reductions in their workforce here in Wyoming. We've become very dependent on federal resources through our integrated interagency fire suppression response. And right now there's uncertainty in the system. With federal agencies, as there's freezing right now on fire hiring, that means there's freezing on training. There's a lot has been put on hold right now in the federal world when it comes to how much resources we're gonna have and have available. There's bills right now in Congress looking at combining the fire workforce from the Forest Service into the DOI. There's multiple moving parts occurring right now, and I think this task force is very timely to start looking at what this could mean for Wyoming in our future. And with that, I'm going to stop there and open it up to the committee for any questions you may have.
Any questions at this point? Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. So I'm gonna slide back out of the task force back into that prior section.
Okay.
One of the things that, so I'll just say about like the fire we had outside of Chugwater and the Diamond Guest Ranch more specifically, where we came into state lands and had fire on state lands, and I know there was some frustration of how that was handled on the state's level. Can we talk towards, because the concern is that that basically local put out fire on state land but don't see reimbursement for those fires being put out. Basically our assets being used on state land without reimbursement for those asset uses. Can you speak to that, please?
Forester Norris.
Yes, Chairman, Representative, that is a very good question and a very interesting challenge. You are correct. We have, across those 70 fire districts, volunteer firefighters responding to fires, and it doesn't matter if it's private, state, or federal, they're responding. And over 99% of those fires are being put out by those volunteers, absolutely. And they're coming back and not charging for their time. So those engines that are going out, they're filling those gas tanks, they're utilizing resources, and yes, you are correct. They are not turning around and billing state lands for those. And the back end, when we have a fire that goes beyond our mutual aid agreements, and that's what is occurring, is those fires are being put out during a mutual aid agreement. And so what Wyoming does is we provide our aviation 24 hours, our smoke busters, all of our resources for over 24 hours, not to bill. When we get beyond the mutual aid, that's when we look to hear that the counties or that jurisdiction is getting beyond its capacity. And that's when they're calling and asking for the emergency fire suppression account, and we're opening that up. I do believe in certain areas of the state, there is a desire to relook at those rules, relook at how they're being funded. And that's a funding issue. And that's why we want to look at this holistically, because funding versus capacity and resources, they're all interconnected. If you look at how some of the other states fund wildland fire, how they budget, they also have a significant difference in the amount of resources the state provides. And so I do think this is, to your point, really needs to be looked at holistically as Do we need to make changes also in the EFSA, how we fund things? Do we need to look at how we respond together? And one decision or one change will really impact all of that when it comes to wildland fire.
Follow-up?
Follow-up, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So really, maybe I'm more hearing the task force, that's something that the task force could look at as they're moving forward of, hey, how do we take, and whenever it's a situation where assets are being allocated, but it doesn't hit that 24-hour mark, and we're kind of stuck in this limbo mode where, hey, maybe we spent all of our time on state lands, but yet it didn't hit 24 hours, so we can't tap in. We still had to do X, Y, Z, and we had it. So that could be a task force question. Is that what I'm hearing?
Forster North.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, you're absolutely correct. That is a decision I think needs to get made with the fire service as a whole, with legislature, with all our stakeholders. That is what my communication back to the fire community is the state forester isn't going to up and change rules without real input, because to understand the impacts and the effects, they're all interrelated. So absolutely.
Any further questions for the forester at this point? Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Norris, I'm thinking about this task force, and it sunsets here shortly. How many times do you think they would need to meet, and what do you hope to learn from them?
Forster North, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that is a great question that will probably be determined by the two chairs who will co-chair that, but I think there will need to be quite a few meetings. And it's going to be quite a bit of work. We recognize that as state forestry and the fire community, we're going to need to bring forward quite a bit of information and front load quite a bit prior to meetings. But I do think we can come up with some pretty good solutions to start. I think there's some low-hanging fruit we can work on together and then move forward and see if there's a recommendation to continue with that task force as the world is changing, specifically in the federal world too. So I think it sunsets December 31st, 2026. So we have some time beyond even this legislative going in with the recommendations to keep the committee together as necessary to probably relook if there's a request of some sort during this next session as well.
Ms. Norris, I'd like to hear from you again. We heard that from the bringer that there's no rulemaking authority, but I thought I heard you say that you are making some rules. Can you kind of explain what's going on there?
Mr. Chairman, we're making guidance policies. It's not rules in the rulemaking. The rulemaking that the state forester has authority for is in the emergency fire suppression account. And that is stated in chapter 36. It's specific to that. We have agreed policies that we have set in place for standards when it comes to wildland fire. They're not true rules, as you would say rules, but there are standards and processes that we use when it comes to wildland fire and training and positions that, as you will, in an incident command type setting when we're out on fire. Beyond that, no, there is no other rulemaking that the state forester does.
I see here on 36.2.108, it's pretty explicit currently where it says that in no way will you diminish the responsibility or authority of local fire protection districts. I'm sure that takes a little bit of nimbleness on your part to accomplish your tasks and yet leave that local control there. Mm-hmm. In the same respect, I see this task force maybe taking some of the decision-making authority that you have away from you and letting a group of people do that while simultaneously, it seems like you're doing a great job of going out and talking to these industry people and getting their input. Could you just address for just a moment for me how you've been dancing this dance with local governments and getting the input from industry and those types of things, and how this task force really would change that?
Mr. Chairman, that is a great question. It is a challenge. At times, it comes across that the state forester has over 30 bosses, depending on who is making the request or the demands at the time. It is an interesting situation where we're structured right now. With that, you're right, we do a lot of coordination, a lot of work, a lot of, I call it reining in the monkeys, and we get together and say, this is where we're going, right? With that being said, I think there is some possible statute changes, possible things that need to be looked at, and hence the need for the wildfire task force, that versus a state forester, the state forestry OSLI comes forward with recommendations, that this would come forward with the input of legislators as well. And so I think it's larger than just looking at it with coordinating in the rulemaking. I think there's larger things that we need to discuss when it comes to funding as well. That really, I think, is why you're seeing the legislators involved in that.
Thank you. Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, as you were walking through the bill, lines 1 and 2, where this is what reminded me is the word rules in there. You mentioned a red card. Okay. No understand red card.
Ms. Norris, please inform us of the red card.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative. Thank you. We have our own language in fire. Red cards is a standard. So we have a national wildland coordinating group standard that we have agreed to follow. There is a certain amount of training required, certain amount of classes, and so a basic firefighter can get what we would call a red card. We also have, as a state, when volunteers go out as cooperators out of state or out in other jurisdictions just to go help each other and are going to get reimbursed and paid. For example, when we had Campbell County show up to Elk Fire, or Sheridan County show up to any of the number of fires in Campbell County, when they go to get reimbursed, we have certain standards that they get paid at, and it's based on what they have in their qualifications and what we call a red card. Did I explain that enough? Okay.
All right.
I should have passed it off.
Follow up? All right. Okay.
Okay.
We'll go ahead.
I'll close it up. The only other comment I wanted to really make on section 3 is just the importance of this. And every one of you are well aware the importance of refilling the emergency fire suppression account. You know, there's appropriate language in there now to make sure that the supplemental budget takes precedence. But with that being said, this is really critical to ensuring that there's funding available for public safety and protection. So with that, I just wanted to leave it there. And I really thank you. Thank you for hearing this today. There's quite a few people here that want to testify as well and talk on the record. But I do really appreciate each of you listening to us today.
All right. Any further questions for the forester? All right. Thank you for being here. We'll go ahead and open this up to public comment. Just for my purposes, if I could see hands, everybody who wants to testify on this. Okay. All right. So before we get started with anybody else, are there any other agencies that need to testify on this before we get started? Any elected officials in the room? All right, that want to testify on this. All right, so here we go. Come on forward, gentlemen. And Ms. Childress, do we have anyone online for this bill? Okay, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. We'll go from my left to right, your right to left. And please introduce yourself, sir, and tell us your thoughts on Senate File 152.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jerry Parker, County Fire Warden for Park County. And we are here in support of all 3 articles of this bill. It is very important to the fire service that
Mr. Chairman.
state forestry.
Hold on.
pull the mic
hold on a
closer?
second. Yeah, could you just pull that mic just a little bit closer? We're having trouble getting your voice on record.
Sorry, is that better?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and start again with the reintroduction,
Okay.
just so that we can get that on the public record.
I'm Jerry Parker, Park County Fire Warden. We're here in support of all three of the articles of this. It is very important to the fire service. The EFSA account is very important to local fire districts that wouldn't be able to support the cost of those fires. And the first one to give Kelly, to State Forester, excuse me, more direction on how she needs to operate. And part two, with the task force, she's correct. Every fire district in Wyoming is different. Some don't have any mountain areas, some just have plain areas, some have both. And we need to try and get organized so that we all know exactly what we do. Thank you.
Welcome to House Appropriations. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Bill Krapser. I'm the retired state forester. Was state forester for 19 and a half years. The one thing I can say to start off with, after hearing the state forester talk this morning, I will pat myself on the back and say I made a brilliant hiring decision about 14 or 15 years ago.
And we appreciate that.
Again, I'm in support of 152, both professionally and personally. The first section that clarifies and refines the duties of the state forester, I think, is a very important part of the bill. As you've previously heard from the bringer of the bill and from the state forester, the current statute is fairly vague. I probably dealt with vagaries more than I should have on some things, which is why as the state forester said, we're doing a lot of the things that are defined in the bill. But I think this really moves the authorities, the responsibilities of the state forester forward, and clarifies what the duties are. The task force, I think we are, as the state forester said, we are at a kind of nationally, regionally, statewide, and locally at a turning point on how we deal with wildfire. I think the task force can look at some of the things, how we're structured, how other states are structured, and see if there's tweaks that may be made to our system, or the task force may come back and tell the legislature, hey, don't fix it, it ain't broke, run like it is. So I think the task force is very important from that standpoint to really clarify. As far as the funding, you guys know that better than everybody else, and I trust that that's moving forward correctly. Again, I appreciate that Senator Barlow brought this bill forward, and that your committee is moving forward on it, and would answer any questions that you might have from a historical standpoint, I guess. Thank you.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Krapser? All right. Thank you for being here. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Eric Quinney. I'm the current president of the Wyoming Fire Chiefs Association, and also here representing all 23 county fire wardens. I'm the county fire warden in Uinta County. First and foremost, on the heels of the 2024 fire season, this has really put this issue at the forefront for us. This bill is our top legislative priority because of the 2024 fire season that we had. And I'd like to go on record publicly thanking the state forester and her staff for the response and the assistance that they provided to the fire season this year. Without their support, and without the support of the emergency fire suppression account, our fire districts cannot handle emergency or fire suppression on large wildfires by ourselves. One retardant drop from a DC-10 sometimes exceeds an entire year's budget of some fire districts. Mm-hmm. We have no ability to do this on our own. So we need the support of state forestry, and we are excited that this bill has been brought forward because it certainly codifies what she's already doing. She goes above and beyond in many of the things that she does, and so this certainly codifies those responsibilities. The task force is going to give us an excellent opportunity, like she said, to take that holistic approach, and we are going to be involved in that task force and the fire service representative on the task force, and so we feel like we are going to have a voice, and we are excited to be involved in that process. And then obviously the funding mechanism of the emergency fire suppression account is so important. with having spent $56 million this year in putting out fires in Wyoming, certainly local jurisdictions don't have that ability to do that on our own. So we are appreciative of the support of this body and this committee to help refill those funds. So with that, I'm representing the fire service in Wyoming. We are super supportive of this bill and ask for your help and favor in getting this through the process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? All right. Gentlemen, we appreciate you being here.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I forgot one point to Representative Harrelson's question about the size of the task force and the number of people on the task force. The only comment I would add on that, from my experience, sometimes smaller is better, and bringing in other experts to talk at an individual meeting for input, to come up with recommendations, just in my personal view, may work better than growing the task force to an uncumbersome size.
Okay. All right. All right, thank you. Much appreciated. Any further testimony on this bill before we? Mr. Winning, welcome to House Appropriations. I don't want anybody watching on video to think we don't have the heater on today, though.
You guys got some kind of crud running around the house, and I'm gonna try to make sure I don't get it.
Very well, sir. Thank you for being at House Appropriations. Please give us your opinion on Senate File 152.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, I'm from Sublette County, and particularly the Bondurant area. And I want to draw your attention to the Roosevelt fire of 2018. You may have perhaps recall an article by the Cowboy State Daily people that said, "I stayed on my property and fought the fire with a garden hose." That's baloney. What happened, what I did was that summer in July, Forester Krapser, his people, and some of the U.S. Forest Service people made a presentation. I walked out of that and I said, something's coming. Get off your butt and go do something. So I then started cutting down a dozen and a half sagebrush plants around my house every day through actually the time the Roosevelt fire started. And that's the real key there, is when the fire comes over the hill at you, your firefighting is over at that point. And so I have to say thank you to former Forester Krapser, because his presentation bothered me. I first became associated with the Bondurant area in the late 70s. There had not been any kind of a major fire out there at that point, and I had seen nothing about it since, so I knew something was over there. So the key thing for me was I was lucky I didn't have pine trees on my property, so all I had to do was get rid of the sage. If I could beg your indulgence for a minute, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to show you a picture. This was taken about an hour after the flame front went by. And what you'll notice is it ran out of fuel. Now, I gotta tell you, when the flame front went by, it was impressive. But it was State Forester Krapser's work getting the word out there.
If you could hold on just a second till you get back to the mic, I don't think it's gonna get recorded. So starting with State Forester Krapser.
Yeah, I should have carried this with me. How about that? Anyway, I have great appreciation for the work that he did then. And so I think this bill is a doable do, and I think it's important. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Wynn? All right, we appreciate your being here. Mr. Riemann.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. We are in support of this legislation. As you know, counties are the frontline defense and ultimately put out the vast majority of the fires that ever exist in the state. But the back-end supports that this legislation provides are critical to the financial health of those jurisdictions being able to respond. Also very supportive of the notion that we need to take a holistic evaluation of our system across the state and see where we can do better and enhance our capabilities. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be brief. We do support this.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Riemann? Seeing none, we thank you for being here. Any other testimony on Senate File 152 from the room? Please come forward and introduce yourself. Welcome to House Appropriations.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Holly Kennedy, and I'm here today representing the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. Here today to stand in support of this bill and also to show our appreciation for your discussion and commentary on the size of the task force and who should be at the table. I do think those are very important conversations. While you certainly want the task force to be nimble, it's also important to have the right people at the table for those discussions. And so with that, looking at the charge of the task force and looking at, the things that they're supposed to look at and work on, we would like to offer, when you're looking at studying the impacts to private and state lands, state agencies, local fire jurisdictions, individuals and communities, and in particular when they're supposed to be studying preventative measures. We do feel that conservation districts are an important voice at that table. One, because of their intersection between all of those different landowner interests, but also because of their expertise. As you are probably well aware, all 34 of our conservation districts have special expertise in land management, and many of our conservation districts also have special expertise on staff related to forestry and forestry management. And so we would just like to offer that. We think conservation districts bring an important voice to the table, as well as they bring an important perspective from cross-boundary work and the ability to find, maximize, and leverage funding to get some of these preventative measures done.
Questions for Ms. Kennedy? Ms. Kennedy, do you see that this task force, without a member from a conservation district, still being incapable of actually getting in front of this task force and getting your voices heard?
Thank you, Representative Bear, members of the committee. I do certainly think that there's still opportunity for us to engage, yes. I would hate for us to miss an opportunity to be a part of the conversations and for there to be a missed opportunity for them to provide some of their expertise, knowledge, and information and input into those meetings.
Noted. All right, we thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Anyone else would like to comment on Senate File 152? Seeing none, we'll close public comment on Senate File 152. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Angelos, seconded by Haroldson. We'll work our way through the bill. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as we're looking at this list, so this is a page 4 or 5 amendment, if we're okay with that. I'd like to take and I'd like to make an amendment on page 4, line 15 to slide to 1 member of the Wyoming House. And on page 20, or line 21 on page 4, 1 member of the Wyoming Senate. One second, before we get the second, I'm gonna add the third aspect. And then I would like to add, because this is my deal, there may be that one person that doesn't quite fit into a category but needs to be on this task force. And I can personally think of a couple people right now that I know that could definitely be. Not you, absolutely not, nope. But I'm getting people going, not me. So I would like to put in, on page 6, 1 member that can be selected for, and Jackie, excuse me for not having the language exactly down, but one member selected for their expertise that they can bring to the table on this. And so we can get a cleaner language on that probably. But one member that can bring something to the table that we maybe, so it could be a conservation district. It could be, we don't know. And we're gonna put that more as we start building this team, the purview in is my concept. Because I think that we'll find as we start having this conversation that we could have someone come out of the woodwork that we're like, that person needs to be on this team. And so we'll drop 2 off, add 1 on. So, and if we need to work on language, I can work on language with Jackie to make that reality.
Okay. So you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Smith. Discussion. Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Haroldson, who decides and brings somebody in?
Representative Haroldson.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Chairman and Representative Pendergraft, this is under the other members appointed by the governor as follows.
Representative Haroldson, I really don't like that open language. I prefer that this body and the House and Senate decide, what these members would look like. So the open language, I think, creates a situation where you might as well keep more legislators than that, because legislators could bring that type of expertise that you're talking about, in my opinion. Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess it might be amenable to divide this, changing the members from 2 to 1 as one section, and then vote separately on a member selected. And regarding the members of the House and Senate, when we heard testimony, it sounded to me like the main reason to have them there was so that if there needed to be legislation crafted, they would be able to do that. And I think 1 apiece is fitting for that. And I also share a little bit of skepticism about a wild card.
Okay.
So I guess
So,
there's a movement to divide.
all right, you've heard a motion to divide, and I'll rule that as divisible. So now on division, we'll call Division 1 the reduction of the 2 legislators. Any discussion on Division 1? Seeing none, all those in favor of Division 1 say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. That carries. On to Division 2. Any discussion on Division 2?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Haroldson.
my experience in 4 years in the legislature is we put a lot of people in positions because it's what we're supposed to do, not because it's the smart thing to do. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make it where we put the right people at the table. So we just had a retired state forester that probably has more experience than any legislator 10 times over. Well, what about that individual? So I look here, well, they could be the forester's designee. That could work possibly, right? Well, then I sit there and I've got a fire warden in my district that is a very big part of this bill even becoming reality. Well, he's a retired county fire warden. I don't see a slot for him on this. You know what, we just heard about some different districts, like the conservation district, saying, hey, what about a slot at the table? And so why I want to put kind of, as what you've called a wild card or an open slot in, is the fact that we could put another legislator on here. But I can say with confidence, I can go outside this room and find someone that knows about this way more than a lot of our legislators do. And so I just think that it's not a lion's share, it's one slot. And so I think it's an intelligent way of opening up that one slot to say, hey, this is it. Now on the flip side, I'll play my own devil's advocate. I don't want it to also be a deal where people are jiving for that slot and it becomes a competition. I don't want that either. But I just think that I don't want to pigeonhole ourselves into only allowing certain things. So that was my logic behind it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It just seems to me like if the panel that is there, if the board that is there wants to seek out specialized information, it's very easy to bring somebody in at that portion and get their testimony. And I guess I'm not sold on needing one more seat at the table.
Right, I'm going to make a comment too, and we'll go ahead and close the debate back and forth. If there's any additional information, we can certainly bring it to this discussion, but, you know, we have probably 23 counties that could fit into your scenario, and we're not going to put 23 people on this task force. As you testified earlier, it would be incapable of accomplishing anything. And we did hear testimony from the Forester Norris that there'll be several meetings necessary to get the work done for this committee. And I would also say that it's under a very short time frame to get that done. So with that, is there any other testimony on another part of this division? Okay, without seeing any more testimony or discussion on it, all those in favor of Division 2, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all those opposed? No. Okay, that division fails. All right, moving on. I think we'll go back to page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8. Representative Smith.
On page 8, line 4 and 5, can we cut the 25,000 in half since we cut the legislators in half? The appropriation.
State your change again.
So we had appropriated 25,000 for for 4 legislators. So we cut the legislators in half, so cut the 25,000 in half.
So that'd be 12,500. Okay, you've heard the motion. Representative Sherwood, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure we're not digging into the ability to compensate the entire members of the task force by this change.
Representative Angelos.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I think the other part of this is that this is for Legislative Service Office for purpose of providing. So there are other members of the Legislative Service Office for recording, setting up. So I think we need to keep that whole to make sure that, LSO is made whole in that too.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we're going to do something, I think we need to do it right. And what I would not want to see is for this board, for this task force, to feel compelled to kind of curtail or crush. I don't want to see them sit there and expound on everything just because they can. But I also don't want to see them making decisions. Man, we've had a hard time with this. We've been discussing for quite a while. We need to just do something. So I guess I would be opposed to that.
Opposed to the motion, okay. Representative Alaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of like this amendment because most of the people on the task force are already being paid by the state.
Representative Angelos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to disagree. You'll see on line 14 that any remaining appropriations that are unobligated shall revert. So I think our people are pretty good at being fiscally responsible.
Representative, okay, I haven't gotten a second on this motion yet. Is there a second?
Oh, sorry. That was my mistake. No.
Seconded by Alaman. Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of Representative Smith's amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
All right, that fails. Okay. Any other on page 8? Any other discussion on page 8? Page 9? Page 10? Page 11? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to align with what we have mirrored in the budget, I'm going to make an amendment on page 11, line 4, and keep that at 30 million.
Okay. seconded by Angelos. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the Sherwood Amendment say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. That carries. Okay. Still on page 11. Page 12. Page 13. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, Ms. Childers, would you please take the roll?
Roll call vote, Senate File 152, do pass with amendments. Representative Allemand? Aye. Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Haroldson? Aye. Representative Pendergraft?
Aye.
Representative Sherwood?
Aye.
Representative Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Bear?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 7 aye.
All right, Senate File 152 do pass. And let's see here. Representative Angelos, you're on this bill. Would you like to manage this on the floor? Senator Barlow, is there any concern about Representative Angelos carrying this? Okay. Put you on the spot there, didn't I? All right. All right. Thank you. Okay. All right, moving on. Let's take up Senate File 145. Welcome, Madam Majority Floor Leader, to House Appropriations.
Good morning. Good to see everyone here. Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and just get started.
Please do.
Thank you. Good representatives, you have in front of you Senate File 145, Local Government Investments and Equities. As you might recall, in 2022, through a constitutional amendment, the people voted to allow for local governments to invest in equities. And so this bill is in response to the people's vote, authorizing their local governments to have this additional source of revenue. And so this is providing that statutory authority and the sidebars associated with that ability. So to walk through the bill with you, really the focus on the bill is found on page 2, which authorizes all the government entities in the state to, as found on the new language that's underlined, page 2, line 6, invest in equities. And so the specifics here, and I'll just walk through those with you. Investments made under this paragraph shall comply with all provisions of investment policy statements applicable to local government investing adopted by the State Loan and Investment Board. And so why SLIB? And SLIB, really, they invest our state funds as well through our state treasurer's office, and they have that investment policy and have access to the chief investment officer to get that really astute guidance on these investment policies. So through great conversation with the treasurer's office, with local governments, with the expertise on the ground, that this is the right path to afford that flexibility associated with the right sidebars for those investment in the equities. So all risks associated with the investment of equities under this paragraph shall be assumed by the government entity making the investment. So request from our chief executive's office, and just a reminder to the local governments of this issue, and that it is theirs and theirs alone. A political subdivision may establish an investment advisory board to provide advice and expertise on investments made under this paragraph. So what does that mean? Why is this in there? It's not dissimilar to our own state investment board, which would be the IFC that you're all familiar with, recognizing that we rely heavily on our investments. And in order to gain that proper expertise, we have created a board to give us that good guidance to our state treasurer on those investment policies. So not dissimilar to that concept there. So we're on line 15 now. Investments made under this paragraph shall not be subject to Romanet 28 of this subsection, or this new statutorily created 91419, which we passed last year, and that's a reference to WyoStar 3. So let's talk briefly about our WyoStar accounts. So WyoStar accounts are programs that we created allowing local governments to invest through our state treasurer's office to pool their investments and earn those returns. And they have different functions. One's longer term, one's shorter term. And what we've learned through those programs is no one likes them. Local governments don't like them, and the state treasurer's office doesn't like them. And so it's just not working for anybody, and this bill is really that solution, recognizing that it's not working. And we don't want, and in many ways, this makes a whole lot of sense, right? We want our investment team at the state level to be focused on state investments. We rely on that's a fourth to a third of our entire revenue that we receive is based on those investments, and those are big dollar investments, right? And so we want them focused on all of our state accounts on that piece, not necessarily advising every city, town, and county or local government district, conservation district. It's just a little too much for our state treasurer's office to be providing investment advice and investing those funds at that level. So that's a primary reason why it's not working from the state perspective, and then from the local perspective, may just not be getting that customer service that they want or the knowledge base that they want through those programs. So the candid answer is, it's not working. And so this is another solution to afford that revenue generation in the way that we have for those local governments. But those programs still exist, and they'll continue. So I want to make sure that's clear, that if they want to continue to invest in those WyoStar programs, they certainly can, but that's probably unlikely. The state loan and investment boards, we're on line 17, shall adopt investment policy statements for investments by local governments. There we go, that we talked about previously in the paragraph. The board shall include in the investment policy statements requirements and conditions comparable to the requirements and conditions specified in 94715 and 716, and this is in reference to our own state policy investment guidelines. And so this is the sidebarred piece, right? That says, because there was significant concern, this issue has been addressed in the Capital Finance and Investment Committee for years, which we've been a member on, and consumer protection concerns. And is there a higher enough level of sophistication with our local governments to ensure that they're not perhaps being taken advantage of and engaging in maybe high-risk contracts with local investment companies that are looking at just kind of making money off of this revenue? And so this, through all of these years of discussion, is the safety net, is the sideboard that really prevents or prohibits or discourages, prevents is the stronger word, from those local governments perhaps from being taken advantage of. So I want to just let you know that consumer protection piece is there, but they are investing at their own risk. I want to make sure that's clear as well. Just a random statement on page 3 that the treasurer's office likes, that nothing in this paragraph shall be construed to limit or alter the state treasurer's authority to invest state funds, right? So it's kind of obvious this doesn't necessarily deal with that, but that's there. Section 2 relates to the ability of political subdivisions to already invest in different types of investment vehicles that aren't equities. So they currently can invest in all the other investment vehicles available with the exception of equities. But now, since 2022 and the people's vote, and hopefully this bill, that's going to move forward. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for questions. I know there's a lot of local governments would like to talk with you about the hope that they have for this bill, but I'm happy to stand for questions.
Okay. Questions for the bringer? Seeing none, we appreciate your being here, and we'll move on to agencies. Welcome back to the House Appropriations. Please
Thank you,
state the
Mr.
name.
Chairman. Good morning. I'm Dawn Williams, the Deputy State Treasurer. I'm joined here today by Patrick Fleming, who is joining us by Zoom, and I would like to hand over any comments that he'd like to make.
Ms. Childress, could you please bring in Mr. Fleming? Welcome, Mr. Fleming.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. It's Patrick Fleming, CIO for the Treasurer's Office. And just a couple quick comments. I know you have other people talking about this, but just really to expound on Senator Nethercott's comments about what we're doing. WyoStar 1 is just a short-term money market fund. WyoStar 2 was a short-term bond strategy, and now we're just doing a natural progression to WyoStar 3. And her comments of it really doesn't work. It's not that it doesn't work. It's just that, as she mentioned, doing a trade for $995 for a very small town or entity when we're managing $31 billion really takes us away from doing what we're trying to focus on. So we do and will have WildStar 3 up and running, and this will really help for some of the smaller entities that they don't have the ability to have an investment funds committee. All they want to do is have a small percentage in equities. So we still have that avenue for them, but then this would also allow local governments to invest. And we already have this in Section 21 of our investment policy statement. And the SLIB would spell out rules and regulations to make sure that these entities are protected and follow certain guidelines, just as we do in some of the bond categories. So just real short and quick, really want to thank Senator for bringing this. We've been numerous meetings throughout the year to discuss it with entities, and we think that this is really a very good bill to allow the local entities to invest. And I'll stand for any questions.
Okay. Questions for the CIO? Mr. Fleming, I'd like to know, within WildStar 3, are there different levels of risk that will be available to these small investors?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and that's something that we're very cognizant of, is protecting the local investors. And as you know, equities are very volatile, and that's why this was the third leg and the last leg to put on, because of that risk. So if you look at the majority of mutual fund managers, 80% of those managers do not beat the index. And so what we're going to do in WildStar 3, just like what we do with our internal investments and overall fund with U.S. large cap equities like the S&P 500, it is extremely difficult for a manager to consistently beat the index. So with that, what do? We index it. We pay 2 to 3 basis points for that right to buy an ETF, and we just index it because it's so hard. As I said, 80% of managers do not beat the index. So that is the same thing that we're going to do with the local entities. They would have the ability to, with $1,000, to buy a broad exposure, 500 U.S. large cap stocks, and have that for a longer period of time, holding period, et cetera. But that would limit the investments, excuse me, investment exposure and risks for these entities. They're not doing single stocks. They're just taking a broad exposure to get U.S. equity exposure with still risk, obviously, but not as much as buying like small caps or, Chinese stocks or what have you. It's only U.S. dollar, U.S. stocks, large cap stocks.
Mr. Fleming, what are the limits going to be on this WildStar 3 as far as, we saw where local entities in WildStar 1 and 2 were withdrawing funds before, they really were mature, and so we ended up with penalty issues. It created some concerns. I know it makes this less workable, the current investment programs that we have, but what kind of limitations are going to be on WildStar 3 as far as, withdrawals?
So, Mr. Chairman, we're working through the rules and regs as we speak, but if you look at a normal business cycle, it is approximately a minimum of 5, if not 7 years. So what you would like to do is have a investment that you're not in and out of the market, but you're holding on to that investment for a longer period. And so that would be some of the things that we are looking at right now to implement to make sure that there's a minimum holding period, a minimum amount that the person, if you have, for instance, if you have an entity that only has $1 million, and they want to put, 800,000 into equities, that doesn't make sense from any asset allocation perspective. So what we're trying to do is put these rules in to not only protect the entity, but make sure that they're not day trading, that they have the proper authority and so forth to do so. Just on your comments about WildStar 1 and 2, WildStar 1 is just a money market. That's easy. WildStar 2, there were certain entities that were looking at overnight funds that were trading higher than WildStar 2 at the time. WildStar 2 is a very, very, very successful fund. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. And in fact, it's one of the best performing short-term funds out there. So if that is what you wanted, which some people are saying, well, I kind of wanted something similar to a higher yield, but now WildStar 2 has a much higher yield than what is out there in money markets. It's like 4.25%. And their performance was over 6% in WildStar 2. So I would disagree in the sense that it wasn't a success. It's just that, one, there was some misinformation about the understanding of what the yield was and so forth, but it did exactly what it was supposed to do. The manager beat the index. It is a successful fund, and there were no penalties on the withdrawal. We don't charge a fee. We don't do anything. Whatever you want to do, you can take it out and do what you want to do.
Mr. Fleming, did those withdrawals create issues for your department?
Well, Mr. Chairman, WildStar 1 and WildStar 2 has never been under management by our staff, the investment staff. It is farmed out to JP Morgan. WildStar 3 is going to be actively, if a 5-year holding period or whatever is active, that's a term of active, but we will be implementing those trades internally. And so that is the difference on it, to make sure that, the funds receive those extremely low percentage cost right now. Getting into details, but the ETF that we look at is 3 basis points in expense ratio. That's what you're charging. That's 0.03% is what 3 basis points. There's 100 basis points and 1%. They will achieve an extremely low cost of doing business with professionals actively managing that portfolio.
Mr. Fleming, just I'd like you to prognosticate on the effect of Senate File 145 on the success of WildStar 3. I know WildStar 3 is not ready yet, but it seems to me that this is going to be in direct competition with WildStar 3. Can I get your thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, yes, great point. And as I said, I really believe that the entities that have a very large asset base, for instance, I advise the city of Cheyenne. I'm on the investment board. And so we have a board that talks about the investments. What's great asset allocation? We have developed our own internal policy statement, things like that. So for someone who is much more advanced and understands how much they should have and what they want to do, I think doing it internally is have them actively manage this is a great way to move forward. Conversely, as I said, if it's a small entity that all they want is this very small allocation to equities over a long period of time, then it will really fit what they're looking for. So I would envision that maybe large entities would like our professional management of it, and small entities I'm sure would like to do that. The best part about this is the bill states that the State Loan Investment Board is going to set out the policy and procedures, which we do for all of our investments. And this is Section 21 of the IPS, if any of you care to read it. But that way we go through and make sure that these local entities, if they do it internally, that they're protected, because this is really an area that there's some graph and uncertainty going on. People will go, oh, we have these local, investment entities that don't understand it, and we're going to sell you very high feed annuities. It's like 6 to 7% fees. And these are the things that we protect. We put on limits of what the transaction costs will be. We put on limits what the expense ratio will be. So even though this would be able for them to do it internally, the SLIB board, I'm speaking for what they have done in the past, I'm assuming would do the exact same thing as what we've done for WildStar 2, but it will still protect all entities and put limitations of what they can and cannot do. I would be shocked if they're able to buy small cap Chinese stocks or things like that. Those are the things that the SLIB board, in consultation with our office, the IFC Investment Funds Committee, will do to protect all entities. But it will allow them to control and buy and sell these securities on their own.
Any further questions for the CIO? Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Fleming, for being here today. So one concern that I do have is, and I'm just kind of exploring this concept. If we're looking at, you said 5 to 7 years, obviously, to see these accounts basically walk out their life cycle. We know that there's going to be some penalties if you draw early. So really, this isn't creating a rainy day account or a rainy day fund. This is long-term allocation of asset for income base is kind of what I'm seeing it as. Am I right when we're talking about this third tier account, that it's more income based downstream instead of rainy day account feel?
Mr. Fleming?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative, yeah, what they're, I wouldn't say income-based because, and that's part of the WildStar 1, 2, and 3. WildStar 1 and 2 would be income-based. So WildStar 3, obviously, as you know, which is equity, is really long-term capital appreciation. So for instance, there are entities out there, Casper, for instance, who has a pool of assets that they do not need the money for years. And so instead of being in cash or a short-term bond, they would love to take advantage of a longer-term investment that would allow them to use those funds, and then when they need them, would be able to withdraw. So those are the types of things that we're looking at. But that's why it's so very important for these entities to understand asset allocation. And so you never, ever want to have a big chunk of your assets tied into something if you're going to need them. So this would be something that they would need to address and look at and say, you know, yes, we have this pool of money that we're not going to need for many years, and we're trying to grow the fund. And this would be an ideal situation for them to do that. If they got together and the treasurer said, you know, no, we have no idea what we need 5 years from now, then they're just going to stay in WildStar 1 and 2. So it really is kind of a catch-all, hopefully, for all funds to be able to look at all three of these asset classes: short-term funds, short-term bonds, and equities.
Okay. Any further questions for CIO? Mr. Fleming, thank you for being here. We appreciate your responding to our questions and addressing this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members.
Go ahead, Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add one other comment. When you mentioned about being in competition, WildStar 3 competing with any other plan, really from what our understanding is from the cities, towns, counties, the local entities, is that they'd like to have an opportunity to make their own choices. And that's just not something that we can offer them. You know, as Patrick said, it's just easier for us to put these folks into an ETF, whereas these larger funds have more expertise than that. They'd like to be able to make their own decisions and do some more pointed and characteristic for their community's selections of what kind of investments they want to make. And we just don't offer that alternative. So I would say that we are not in competition, that this bill really offers those locals those different opportunities that we're just not able to at the state level for them. And so we are fully in support of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Ms. Williams? Director Williams, I have a question for you. On page 2, line 13, it says that a political subdivision may establish an investment advisory board. And you just mentioned the desire of these entities to get rolling, to get something done that, you know, your office may or may not be capable of doing either at this time or in the future effectively for them. What are your thoughts on this may establish an investment advisory board versus the I don't know, the risk versus the idea that we're going to make big decisions as far as what we're going to do with taxpayer money?
Mr. Chairman, are you sort of getting at whether it should be a shall or an?
I am.
You know, Mr. Chairman, I think that that's probably a good idea for a local entity, but sometimes there isn't There aren't folks that are available in your community to be able to be that advisory board, so you might have to contract out. So maybe they don't have a board, they, create their own committee, but maybe they do that through a consultant. Maybe they partner with another local entity, perhaps the political subdivision is partnered with the county commissioners. I don't exactly know how all of those local interactions interplay, but I think this was an attempt to allow for some flexibility within those, instead of saying, hey, political subdivision, you have to partner and use the county's investment committee. It was an opportunity perhaps for them to make a difference, have some flexibility.
Madam Majority Floor Leader, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the
give us your thoughts
opportunity.
on that.
I think most of them already do, I think is the reality. So you heard our Chief Investment Officer share with you that he serves on the City of Cheyenne's board. That's not in his role as the state's Chief Investment Officer. Our Chief Investment Officer is a Cheyenne native, and we're very proud of him, and he loves his city that he grew up in. So he serves on that board in his own capacity, in his individual capacity. So the City of Cheyenne has had a board to help create an investment policy. How much should we have in savings? How much should we have invested currently under statute in treasury bonds and other type of investment vehicles? What should our spending policy be? So those already exist. This bill just authorizes a separate asset class for which local governments who can already invest can invest in as well, using the same kind of vehicles and organizational structures that currently exist and they're currently utilizing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for the bringer or for Ms. Williams? All right, thank you. All right, we're going to open this up a little bit. We're going to start with, are there any other agencies here that would like to address this? Okay, before we move on, ma'am, we're going to do elected officials. I saw we have Representative Connolly here. You care to opine on this? And we have Mayor Collins. Would you like to come forward and give us your thoughts? Wait, you want to wait? Is that... Yeah, we have 2 mayors and a team. Okay, I'm sorry. Would you guys like to come on up? We'll get to you next. And Representative Connolly, I'm going to go with the mayors first because we're probably going to have to carry this over to the next meeting, and depending on their testimony, we may ask you to come back at our next meeting. Sure. Okay, but stay put just in case we can get to you. All right, let's get to these 2 mayors here.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If you don't mind me introducing my mayors?
Please.
Okay, thank you so much. Ashley Harpstroot, Executive Director of Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I'd like to introduce Mayor Patrick Collins from City of Cheyenne, who would be a larger entity to talk about this opportunity for our municipalities, and then Mayor Matt Murdock from Town of Pinedale, who would be a smaller entity and could leverage this opportunity. I also would appreciate the county commissioners coming up. We have an elected commissioner that we've been working together on this for a very long time.
Okay, please come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members.
Welcome to House Appropriations.
Thank you. This is actually my second time to speak for you, so I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Matt Murdock. I'm the mayor of the town of Pinedale. I think it's worth pointing out, certain towns clearly have small reserves. I think you pointed out the rainy day funds, but town of Pinedale, for example, has money sitting in our water sewer fund that we're getting maybe 3 to 5%, 4%. These are funds that are there for long term. We are required by state statute also to have funds in reserve in case there is a crisis. So we are looking at things in the future that are coming our way. I can tell you now the town of Pinedale is considering a $20 million wastewater treatment facility. When we go to the State Land Investment Board, the number one question they ask is, are you leveraging everything so that you can match these funds? Our answer is generally yes. We're limited in what we can do on sales tax, but we're doing the best we can. This is extremely important to us. I think it's worthwhile pointing out the town of Pinedale, for example, has already gone through 7 federal audits. We are audited annually. We're also audited. The town of Pinedale has been doing projects with the EPA and FAA and other projects. So we have a really high level of transparency. Our budgets are discussed openly. All our decisions are made. We do have a small investment committee ourselves. So being able to take advantage of this fund and possibly increasing our return by 40 to 50% would be significant for the town of Pinedale. I think that was pointed out earlier, we would probably not put the entire bucket into, but there is clearly a portion of our funds that could sit there for 7 to 8 years that our citizens would see a really nice return on and makes our life a lot better. So I would ask you to move this forward, and I stand for questions.
Okay. Questions for Mayor Murdock? Mayor Murdock, you just mentioned that you have a small investment board. Can you describe that in detail for us, please?
Yes, sir. That investment committee is made up of 2 council members, our legal counsel, our town clerk, and then we also have an outside investment broker type person who speaks to us in that capacity. It's changed the last couple of times just because we've had people moving in and out, but we've tried to be very proactive and thoughtful in the use of our funds with our limited means.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Mayor Collins.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Appropriations Committee, I'm Mayor Patrick Collins from the City of Cheyenne. I am excited about this bill and speaking in favor of it. First, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we manage this. We do have an investment committee at the City of Cheyenne. We have a hired professional manager, Federated Hermes, who we work with at the $835 billion under assets under management. And we have an investment committee that helps direct that. Mr. Fleming, the CIO, is a Cheyenne boy, and we're lucky to have him. We also have another investment professional here in Cheyenne, along with our treasurer, our deputy treasurer, and a couple other elected members of our governing body who sit on that and help direct what goes on. As Mayor Murdock was just saying, as I was thinking about being able to invest in equities, one area that really that I think would really help us is we are facing the closure of our landfill. Now, that's 40 years away. But we're working today and every day to put a little bit of money into the fund because we understand it's going to cost us tens of millions of dollars when that time comes to build our new landfill. We bought the Belvoir Ranch to have a place to do that in 2003. But we know what it's going to cost to build a new one. We also know that it's going to take years of monitoring our old landfill. It's tens of millions of dollars in expenses for us. So we put a little bit of money away every month towards that closure fund. But if we could invest that in equities over those 40 years, historically, those funds would grow at a much larger rate. And I think the benefit for us is going to be that the ratepayers in our sanitation department down the road, their bills are going to be significantly lower because we're going to be able to fund more of the cost, if not all of the cost, of closing the landfill and monitoring it if we're able to invest in equities. And so that's why I'm excited about this opportunity for us. These are funds that we're going to leave for a very long period of time. We also have money, as Murdock said, in our water funds that are long-term holds that would, again, help us long-term be able to create the projects that we need to be able to do. So I'm really confident in the state land investment boards. They're going to give us the rules and the guidelines and sideboards that we need to be able to do this. But I think the opportunity for our ratepayers and for our community is great. And with that, I'd stand for any questions and ask for your support.
Questions for Mayor Collins? Okay, seeing none, we appreciate your being here. I'm going to have to shut us down here so that we can get back down to the floor and get some business taken care of. I apologize, Mr. Commissioner. So if you'd like to comment, I think what we'll do is we'll come back in the second hour of our lunch recess and we'll take this bill up again. So if you're available to come back during the lunch hour, we'd be happy to have you here. And that goes for Representative Collins too, wherever she went off to. Thank you all for being here. And we'll continue this bill on noon recess. Thank you.